following the release from prison on medical parole of former President Jacob Zuma. The One South Africa movement has asked for access, will be asking for access to a formal record of the decision. The former president has been in prison since July after he was found guilty of contempt of court. To weigh in on this is One South Africa movement leader, Mmusi Maimane, joining me now. And Mmusi, thank you for your time. So just give me a sense of where we are in terms of the timeline. You had said yesterday that you would be submitting a request of the record and all relevant details via the Promotion of Access to Information Act. Have you acted on that? And what's the trajectory in terms of trying to gain access to that?
Good morning, and good morning to fellow South Africans. First and foremost, that application would be lodged on an urgent basis, certainly by midday today. So that's a starting point. And secondly, what happens after that is that it is then considered, and they will give us response in that regard, whether they accept the application or not. My objective is to ensure that we get transparency on this issue. We are very clear in our heads who was involved in the decision-making process. Was Mr. Fraser himself, who was a close ally of Mr. Zuma, part of the decision? And what are other features, factors that were considered in taking the decision? Was it a politically motivated decision? And whether or not the medical evidence that was presented is sufficient enough to push a threshold for Mr. Zuma to qualify for medical parole. This is a significant moment in our nation because it moves quite seamlessly away from the rule of law to the rule of man. And I think it's in the interest of all citizens to safeguard ourselves against that sort of precedent taking place.
Which path will you be taking? Will you be taking the ordinary payer path of going to, the relevant department and asking nicely initially for this information to be supplied in terms of the law, failing which then you proceed the legal route in terms of going to the courts, or will you go directly to the courts to have correctional services compelled to disclose this information?
Well, I think it is in the process to allow for the relevant department to be able to comply accordingly, because any court naturally should not be the first point of application. It ought to be the department itself. And so we will, consist with our own legal team, also attach a legal request for the information that we need, so as to ensure that they understand the seriousness with which we are taking this matter. Because ultimately, it's in the interest of all of us as citizens to get to the bottom of this matter. It's got nothing to do in some ways with Mr. Zuma, although he's the principal here. It's that there's equality of the law, whether you are former president or ordinary citizen, that is applied across the board.
What is the motive, Mmusi Maimane? Is it to see Jacob Zuma rot in jail for contempt of court, an offense that is serious, but for which a lot of people don't even spend more than a couple of days in prison? Or alternatively, is the motive to hold the decision makers accountable? Which one do you want the most? Do you want Zuma back in jail, or do you want Arthur Fraser, Ronald Lamula, and others involved in the value chain to account?
No, I think the latter is far more important. Mr. Zuma is but an example. You can literally look at Mr. Sheikh. You can look at Mr. Honorable Jacob Zuma, the former police commissioner. You can look at all of these iterations. At the end of the day, all of us as citizens deserve equality before the law. We deserve those people who serve in positions of power to be accountable to that law. And having dealt with many African countries, I can assure you, the first step to the destruction of a country to lead it to a banana republic is when its courts, whatever sanction they issue is irrelevant. And secondly, people who are politically connected know how to subject the law to their own political connections. So it may be of interest to us to know whether this matter was discussed at the NEC, and does the ANC itself have influence as to whether a parole decision can be made? Because if it does, then we should ask ourselves, which other prisoners are sitting that should be considered? The last point I'd like to make is none of us can deny the fact that upon the arrest of Mr. Zuma, instability ensued in the country, and that had political ramifications for the ANC. Now, given that those are important events that took place, were they a factor in considering his parole hearing? Because if they were, that means political considerations will always trump legal considerations for our country. And then we truly will become a banana republic. So to me, Mr. Zuma is neither here nor there. Whether he's in jail or not becomes irrelevant in the context of upholding constitutionalism, so that in future, you and I will know that our rights are protected, and you and I will know that actually our courts still reign supreme as far as the rule of law is concerned.
How far do you go in trying to understand the basis of the decision that was made? Do you go as far as to ask for his medical record, the report that formed the basis for the decision to be made, such that his state of health, what ailments he suffers from, will be known to yourselves? Or are you content with asking for the details of who's the doctor that attended to him, how serious is his condition, etc., without disclosing what ordinarily would be private details about his health?
Sure. Look, I'm not interested in Mr. Zuma's private medical records in that sense. I'm interested in knowing what types of ailments qualify someone for parole. Because actually, when it's said and done, what if a prisoner has COVID? Is that the threshold we use? Whilst the law is quite specific about incapacity, that they stop being a flight risk, but we need to know the application of that law in the current context of the world. And therefore, for me, it becomes then vital that the rationality of the decision be tested. It will be up to the courts whether the courts will demand medical records so that that rationality is upheld or not upheld. But as for me as a private citizen, I demand to know what is the criteria that was used in being able to come to that decision. Because as we saw in the case of Mr. Sheikh, we do not know what his ailment is, but it seems that given that he's playing golf, etc., or at least there's footage of him doing that, that it wasn't sufficient to say that he deserved medical parole. It would be important to know the same for Mr. Zuma.
Lastly, in your thinking, Musimaimane, going further into this, and I know it's preemptive and in the realm of speculation, should it be found that the decision made by the decision maker was not rational, what suitable remedies are available? And I ask you specifically, would a remedy of ordering that Jacob Zuma be sent back to jail, would that be the remedy that would be appropriate, or would the court, in your view, need to then fashion a remedy that addresses the irrationality while balancing the fact that this man has been told, without his asking, we are told, that you are free, you can go home?
I think it's important that the rule of law be upheld. It's important that constitutionality is upheld. And for me, at the end of the day, the Constitutional Court, regardless of how I might feel about Mr. Zuma, I might be sympathetic to his case or maybe not. That's neither here nor there. What matters is that he was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. And in our view, he should be able to serve that time, unless a court comes back to a decision that says, no, he should not, for the following reasons. And I will be the first one to uphold the rule of law, because it's vital that we be guided by those principles, not by politicians or even the Minister of Justice, who is also a politician. Let me, before I finish, also note the passing of the leader of the NFP, and actually send my condolences to the family. I should have done that up front.
Absolutely.
But say that I'd worked with her as a colleague in Parliament, and also I attended the inauguration of Mr. Zuma, coincidentally. We were together at that inauguration and had time with her, spending time speaking with her. And I think that whilst we disagreed on how to fix our country, we agreed that our country needed to be supreme and that we were both patriots of our nation. And so to his party, to his family, I really want to send my deep condolences to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. That is the leader of One South Africa movement there, Musimaimane. At the end, they're paying tribute to the late Zanele Gamagwaza Msibi, but initially talking about the Promotion of Access to Information Act application that he says will actually be sent off by midday today to the Department of Correctional Services. You know what would be better? You know what would really make things better? Park the issue of Mr. Zuma going home. He's been released by people who took a decision relying on the law that gives them the power to make that decision. You know, if you have nothing to hide, Ronald Lamula, Arthur Fraser, I don't even know why I mentioned him, because it's not like he will respond and give an update. He's not accountable to anyone. It would be better for them to actually come out and just give an extensive explanation. I know that Singabako Nxumalo spoke, but I feel like all these questions about whether or not he qualified, the number of months that a person is supposed to be serving in terms of the sentence, do they match? Is that a match? I see now that the statement talks about 24 months, but the Act, when it talked about 12 months. Mr. Zuma was serving 15 months. We sort of need a bit more clarity on the decision. Just take Jacob Zuma away from it. The decision taken in terms of the law. That would be great.